Predict, pick, and prevail in your fantasy football leagues with Nick Giacobbe and Nick Cap. From breakouts to busts, superstars to sleepers, these are the guys that will help you achieve fantasy glory. This is the PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast.
Welcome everybody to Season 4, Episode 7 of the PrimeTime Fantasy Football Podcast, where we give you our predictions, our picks, with the hopes that we help you prevail throughout the 2024 fantasy football season. I'm your host, Nick Giacobbe. Joining me, as always, is Nick Cap. And Nick, we have a lot of predictions in this show. Every show, obviously, there's predictions. A lot of them in this show. If you look at the title, if you haven't seen the title, it is our MVPs, breakouts, and bust candidates for every single position. 12 players total from me and Nick. Gives you a good look at who's going to be at the top of the draft board, the bottom of the draft board, some sleepers, and how this will reflect the end of your season. This is draft prep. And I know Nick's done a lot of research. I know that Nick's ready to go. He's got his game face on if you're watching on YouTube.
Oh, yeah. Game face. We're clean shaven. We're ready to go. We look like Bob Saleh in the preseason. Get rid of the beard. We might have to diet if we start losing, not getting our predictions right, just like my boy. But yeah, man, we're fired up. We're fired up as always. We got our 12 guys here. Well, 8 of our guys and 4 guys we don't really like. But listen, you're heading into your draft weeks. This weekend, next weekend, biggest weekends for your drafts. For sure. Make sure you're paying attention. You'll know who we're looking at on the board, who we think's finishing 1, who we think's guys you should avoid. So this is a big episode. This is very important towards what you need to do in your draft.
This is the Primetime Fantasy Football Podcast. You could find us on all major audio streaming platforms. You could also watch and listen to the show on our YouTube Primetime Fantasy Podcast. You could also interact with us on all social media platforms. Primetime FF Pod. Twitter is huge for that, especially when the season rolls around. So, like I said, MVP, breakout, and bust. We're going to start off with the MVP at each position. We're not doing defensive kickers or IDP, so not each position, but quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end. And and MVP might not have as much intel as our breakout and bust. It's a little bit self-explanatory, but we're still going to give you guys who we believe will be the MVP. So this doesn't mean that you should draft this player number 1 overall per se if you have the number 1 overall pick, but this might mean that this is the player that we think will finish at number 1 at their position by the time we're in January 2025. So Nick, quarterback, who is your MVP? Who do you think finishes at the number 1 at the position?
I'm going with Jalen Hurts this year. I think that.
All right, we're one down. We're one down. We're the same. All right, there we go.
There you go.
And just to let you guys know, right now, Josh Allen is the consensus QB1 being drafted. I think in every platform, I believe.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, to me, it's a 2-person race. It's a 1 tier of Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen. Either or can finish as the 1 in my books, but I'm going with Hurts this year. Allen, obviously, QB1 last year, losing Stephon Diggs. Gotta imagine he takes somewhat of a step back, and that's not enough to not make him not reliable for fantasy or a top pick. But I just think Jalen Hurts in this new look, Kellen Moore offense, where Kellen Moore has consistently put up top quarterbacks between Dak Prescott and Justin Herbert before all the injuries to that offense. I think we've seen those 2 quarterbacks significantly exceed, and neither of them have the mobility of Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts has been one of the top guys for multiple seasons now. Last year, 22 points per game. The tush push converted first downs and touchdowns 88% of the time. Last season, you upgrade your offensive coordinator. You expect touchdowns to go up. If they're consistent throughout the whole season, which last year they only had about 10 or 11 straight good games, Jalen Hurts is easily one of the best quarterbacks for fantasy. And Nick and I have been all over the Eagles offense this season. We've been singing their praises on this show. So I'm not surprised that Nick also goes with the Hurts. But as another disclaimer, Nick and I don't know who each other are going to say. So you're going to see our initial reactions too, just like you're going to have your own.
One little other note, as I back up everything that Nick stated, another note, the Bills have the 7th hardest strength of schedule going into the season. The Eagles have the 12th easiest strength of schedule heading into the season. It also seemed like the Bills offense kind of cooled down towards the end of the season last year. It felt like the Joe Brady offense was kind of getting figured out a little bit over there. Allen was still very, very productive as a fantasy player. But at some point, his rushing numbers are probably going to go down a little bit. My other concern with Hurts, at least, is how much of a tush push do we see this year? Obviously, Jason Kelce retired. but the rest of the Eagles offensive line did return. So, and Hurts' size also hasn't changed. So I could see them still using the push as long as they do. Still a lot of touchdowns coming his way. Obviously, AJ Brown, Devontae Smith are back. So I still see a really successful season coming from Jalen Hurts. But I'll be honest, I don't love a lot of the quarterbacks this year and where they're being drafted. But that's a different conversation. So where's your breakout? I think we might have the same breakout. Who do you got?
Okay. So for breakout quarterback, I am going with Jaden Daniels.
We do have the same breakout.
Look at that.
There
So Jaden Daniels is the perfect skill set for fantasy football. Last year in college, he led in both yards per pass at 11.6 and yards per rush at 8.4. Kind of one of the greatest college seasons ever, underrated. And he plays so similar to Kyler Murray. And Nick and I have talked about it before. Kyler Murray as a rookie was phenomenal. And guess who his head coach was? Cliff Kingsbury, offensive coordinator for the Washington Commanders. So he's going to have the same exact scheme. And Cliff and everybody has been raving their praises about just how good the Jaden Daniels has been. He's been a must target for me in all my fantasy leagues. He's somebody that I really, really want. And every healthy season for Kyler, and it's a lot easier to compare Kyler with Cliff. Even as a rookie, Kyler was the top 5 in rushing for a quarterback and over 3,700 passing yards. And Kyler Murray did not have the loaded offense that Jaden Daniels is walking into now. He's got the much better roster. He's got Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, De'Ami Brown, veteran Zach Ertz, Austin Eckler, Brian Robinson. I know some of those players don't sound all that great. For a rookie quarterback to walk into that situation is phenomenal. And right now he's going off the board way too late for someone with this high rushing floor and this high upside of having a reliable offense. Everybody's given him a ton of credit for how difficult he was defending practice. I know Sauce has been on that. Zach Ertz is saying in interviews, like people are saying, how good are you expecting him to be? And he's saying he's already good. You don't need to say how good will he be. He's good. It's just how great is he going to be? And my prediction for Jaden Daniels, since I'm calling my shot as a breakout, I'm saying he finishes in the top 8. And if you see some of those quarterbacks at the top miss multiple games, which has happened, I think we saw 60 different starting quarterbacks last season, which was an NFL high. I think Jaden Daniels sneaks into the top 6, maybe the top
5. Echoing all of Nick's points, he had 3,800 yards, 40 touchdowns last year. That was passing with 4 interceptions. Then on the ground, he had 1,100 yards and 10 rushing touchdowns. So that's exactly what you want in a fantasy football quarterback that's a dual threat, complete package player. On top of that, I think the Commanders will be playing from behind in a lot of games. So that's just more yards and more opportunity for Jaden Daniels to really, stuff that stat sheet. So being drafted right now as a quarterback 12 around pick 99. So I like those odds a lot. Who is your bust candidate for quarterback? I think I know who yours is, and I don't think we have the same.
Yeah, I'm gonna guess that you didn't pick this guy because you're all over.
I'm a little bit higher, but I will say this. I think if we want a bold take, and I wish I had this in our bold takes episode. If you haven't checked that out, check it out a couple weeks ago on our YouTube or audio streaming platforms. I think Jaden Daniels could finish above your bust candidate.
Me too.
I know who it is, so I'll let you speak.
CJ Stroud. There is no doubt that he's a great young quarterback, and I'm gonna have to recycle a little bit because you've heard some of these stats if you watched every episode of the show, but just bear with me because my opinion has not budged on this, no matter how good that him and Tank Dell have looked in the preseason together. He's a great quarterback. I think he's phenomenal. I think he's a future of this league. I think he has a Super Bowl contending roster. I think everything checks the marks of a good football team. Good football team, good football quarterback does not mean good fantasy quarterback. Patrick Mahomes has finished as a QB1 once in his career. Every single other season, he is let down for his ADP. And it's not because Patrick Mahomes is not the best quarterback in football. Oh, no. Since his first full season in the league, he's been the best quarterback in football, undeniably. But CJ Stroud is kind of in a similar spot. The only difference is CJ Stroud does not have Andy Reid as his head coach. He has a defensive-minded head coach. Last year, and what was a perfect season for him with all these breakouts and this phenomenal buzz, low turnovers, efficient quarterback play, a lot of yards, a good amount of touchdowns for a rookie. He was the QB 13. He averaged the 10th most points per game at the position. But the fact is, pocket quarterbacks, they don't break out with the defensive coaches. They do not dominate. And right now, he's going off the board, depending on your platform, anywhere from the QB4 down to like the QB6 or 7. And I don't see that. I don't see the 4, the 5, the 6 as the range of outcomes for him in a fully healthy season. If he got 12 more touchdowns, he kept the turnovers low, matches everything else, he'd only finishes the QB6. And right now he's still going above that on most platforms. So that does not give me a lot of confidence. On top of that, the backfield adds Joe Mixon, who was dominant on the ground last year, gets a lot of touchdowns, and probably will with the Texans as a reason that they brought him in. I'd expect Joe Mixon to take some of the touchdowns away from CJ Stroud, where the Texans had one of the worst rushing teams in football last year. And right now, again, going off the board, I see him going before Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes in a lot of drafts, which would put him as a QB3. And I'm not saying that that's a terrible take, because I do think he could finish above Mahomes. He could finish above Lamar, given both of their situations. But again, I do not think that in the grand scheme of things, CJ Stroud week to week is going to finish in the top 6, top 8. I think he's going to scheme out more like a Kirk Cousins, a Dak Prescott, a Jared Goff, a Brock Purdy. Even though I think he's more talented than that group, I think that the accumulation of touchdowns and the yards, they will add up, but the consistency is going to be so up and down. And when you're taking a quarterback with that much draft stock, even if he delivers as a QB6 or 7, there's guys way later that are going to be close enough in points per game, touchdowns, consistency, where you would much rather take them and whoever's going around CJ Stroud's ADP. So again, not saying he's going to finish outside the top 10, outside the top 15, but if he's at the lower end of the top 10, that's a bust for his ADP and who you could grab in those later rounds. So I'm just not as high on him for fantasy, but I do believe in him as a young superstar quarterback in this league.
I think Anthony Richardson is either going to win leagues or completely lose leagues, and I am on the latter of that. His sample size is very small. His sample size over 4 games last year that he played, he averaged 144 passing yards, less than 1 passing touchdown a game. He averaged 34 rushing yards a game, which is good, but that's maybe about 500, 600 rushing yards in the season. He did average 1 rushing touchdown a game. So that is huge in leagues where your rushing touchdowns is more than your passing touchdowns. He finished, and those, those 12, 4 games, he finished tied for 12th in average points last year, 18.4 with Patrick Mahomes, Justin Fields, who will be a backup, and Anthony Richardson. In those 4 games, 21.9, 17.7, 29.6, and 4.4. Really good point totals in those first 3 games. But he's coming off the board right now as the quarterback 5. He's going before guys like Stroud. He's going before guys that had very successful seasons last year, like Brock Purdy, like Dak Prescott, Kyler Murray, who Kyler Murray was actually very good when he did return last year. Kyler Murray was 9th in average at 18.9. Kyler's numbers are 18, 22, 20, 11, 15, 20, 24, 17, and Kyler should have a better team around him this season. So my overall point being, I think you're putting a lot of stock in Anthony Richardson if you're taking him in round 5 at pick 58. When you get a prime tight end or a prime skill position player at that point in the draft. I would rather put my faith in a reliable Joe Burrow, who I know he's gotten hurt, but Joe Burrow is one of only 2 or 3 quarterbacks that could throw for 5,000 yards and 40 touchdowns. So I'd rather put my stock on a guy like Burrow or a guy like Dak, who are pocket passers. I know Anthony Richardson does offer a lot of upside, but does have an injury history. And I'm not sure how well he plays the position of quarterback. I don't know if you saw the comments, Nick. So we're recording on Wednesday, August 21st. There was just a joint practice, I believe, with the Bengals and the Colts. And the Bengals defensive players totally ripped Anthony Richardson and his performance. So I have a lot of concerns as to where his ADP is. Do I think that he has a lot of potential? Sure. I think me or Nick could have also made the argument that he's a breakout candidate this year.
Yeah.
And if Nick made that argument, I would validate his points. But where he's going He's either going to be a breakout or a bust. I don't think there's any safety net when you're drafting Anthony Richardson. And if you are drafting Anthony Richardson, I think you better have a plan in place for a solid backup. Stafford's going really late. Kirk Cousins is going really late. I think you got to go get one of those two guys, because if Anthony Richardson does fall on his face, your fantasy team is going to be in dire jeopardy, and you're going to be in trouble. So
I want to echo a lot of what you said, because Anthony Richardson was the other person I debated for putting as my bust candidate. And like Nick said, he is either going to win or lose leagues. I do not think there's any in between for him. And the fact is, he's going too close to his breakout, where I think, like Nick mentioned, Kyler Murray, a couple rounds later has been more reliable for fantasy, where I'd rather take the shot and wait on someone like that, or a rookie, or a guy like Stafford and Cousins, like Nick mentioned, than take the shot on Anthony Richardson pretty much at his ceiling. For him, Anthony Richardson to be a great pick in fantasy this year, he needs to finish as a top 3 quarterback. That is not going to happen in that Colts offense.
I'm going to pull up these comments real quick, so I just want to make sure. So this is from, here's one from Colts writer at The Athletic. Colts first team offense is struggling. No one looking comfortable, including Anthony Richardson. He's 2 for 8 passing. The Bengals players are talking so much trash, rightfully so. These are some quotes. This is from NFL. I don't want to butcher the last name. Sorry about that. From John Frisella. He is the NFL writer and analyst. He's also, I think he's a New York guy from Fansided. He wrote some quotes. Is that all he does is run? From Cam Taylor Britt. He's just throwing to spots. He doesn't see his receivers. From Geno Stone. Throw the ball, bro. Bengals defenders almost frustrated on behalf of the other Colts players. So we've seen stuff in camp where I know Jamar Chase got a lot of flack in camp, but obviously it didn't matter. So this stuff may not matter until week 1, and that's okay. But I see a lot more signs pointing to Anthony Richardson being a bust than a premier player. And the other thing we didn't talk about is those 4 games that Anthony Richardson played last year, there is no Jonathan Taylor. And that could either help or hurt either player, because they'll both be running the football. They're going to steal touchdowns from each other. But if I'm the Colts and I see that Anthony Richardson, I think he had a concussion last year, and then I think he had the big injury. I forget what the big injury was off the top of my head. But 2 injuries already within your first rookie season. I wouldn't want that quarterback running a ton, especially when you're paying Jonathan Taylor a lot of money. Yep. Why would they even design running plays for Anthony Richardson with the injury history and with Jonathan Taylor? When Cam Newton was with the Panthers, Cam was a better runner, Cam was a better passer, and Cam didn't have a running back like Jonathan Taylor. Neither did Kyler Murray when he was with the Cardinals. So when you have Jonathan Taylor, who's arguably the best running back in the league, not pass catching, but just pure runner, why would you even design a run play for Anthony Richardson and risk the injury? So a lot of Anthony Richardson talk. He could easily prove me wrong, but that's my take. I won't be taking him in any leagues personally. We're going to move on to wide receiver for MV. I just realized we did this completely different than Nick had set up. Nick is running the production of it. In my notes, I listed it out by position. So since I did that,
we'll keep what we're going. We're going to
go by position. So we're going to kick it to wide receiver. Who is your MVP for wide receiver this year?
To me, there's really only 4 guys I think you could pick between. It's the top 4 on the board.
And there's a lot of reason to pick them too. So this is an interesting debate.
So I'm going to go with CeeDee Lamb.
I'm also going to go with CeeDee Lamb.
So I like I mentioned, the top 4, you could kind of land on any of them. I don't think any are an awful pick at this point. But to me, CeeDee Lamb last year is wide receiver 1, over 400 fantasy points in PPR, led the league in receptions, number 2 in yards, number 3 in touchdowns. Every single season of his career, each of those numbers has gone up, which is kind of phenomenal when you think about it, for a 4-year career. And also, he's never missed a single game to injury. So when you want to talk about reliability, you're on the field, you're out there, you're producing, your numbers are going up. Every single year, CeeDee Lamb has taken a step up. So why would you expect anything less when he has the same head coach who over the last 3 years, his numbers have gone up with every single year? Even though Kellen Moore left, it's still a top 3 offense last year. Now on top of that, Tony Pollard leaves, Michael Gallup leaves. There's more targets to go around. So for me, I'm loving Jake Ferguson. I'm loving CeeDee Lamb. Those are two guys that are going to make up a lot of those targets. In the history of the NFL, only 3 players had over 200 targets in a season. No one's ever had 150 catches. This could have been one of my hot takes. I think that CeeDee Lamb is going to break both of those numbers. And if he does that, that makes him the wide receiver 1 in fantasy. And just so you know, last year was 180 targets and a little over, I think, 140 catches or 137, right in that range. So to me, if you're telling me that he's losing the number 2 and 3 option on his team, is the reliable one. They were a top 3 offense last year. He is going to be the most reliable, consistent player for fantasy. I think he's going to average more than 10 targets per game over the course of a year. And to me, it feels like the lock. It might not be the sexiest pick on the board. You might think Jamar Chase is going to have those 40.
I think it is the sexiest pick on the board. I think there's a legitimate argument to take CeeDee Lamb number 1. Dak Prescott has played 8 seasons. He has missed games in 2 of those seasons, one being 5 games, one being 12 games. Here are Dak Prescott's yardage numbers, and I'll do his yardage numbers and his touchdown numbers. Touchdown numbers aren't as good as yardage numbers in seasons where he's played 16 or more games. 3,600, 3,300, 3,800, 4,900, 4,400, 4,500. Touchdown numbers in those seasons: 23, 22, 22, 30, 37, and 36. So you're looking at a guy that's going to throw for over 4,000 yards and 35 plus touchdowns. And like Nick just stated, where's that ball going to go? Tony Pollard's gone. They don't have really any faith in either of the other running backs. They did not draft a receiver, did not sign a receiver. The wide receiver 2 is still Brandon Cooks. It's all going to CeeDee Lamb and a little bit of Jake Ferguson. You're looking at a guy who's probably going to have close to 2,000 receiving yards and probably double-digit touchdowns, maybe closer to to 20 touchdowns. This is a guy that could put up Antonio Brown numbers. I would not have knocked Nick if he told me Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill's going to have another absurd year. I would not have knocked Nick if he told me Jamar Chase. If Burrow's healthy, Jamar Chase can go for 2,000 yards and 15 touchdowns. So there's a lot of talent on the board. But at the same time, the situation that CeeDee Lamb is going to be in, and Amon-Ra St. Brown, I think is going to have a great season too. I will drool over Amon-Ra St. Brown anytime I can put him on my team, because I think Amon-Ra St. Brown is the only guy not named CeeDee Lamb who could lead the league in receptions. But CeeDee is the strongest candidate in my opinion, and I see no reason why he can't repeat his performance. Mm-hmm. Your breakout, who do you got?
I'm going with Rashee Rice. I was in between 2 people.
I figured you were going to go Rashee Rice. I'm glad we don't have the same breakout. That would have been bad if we had another similar one.
Yeah, I mean, Rashee's definitely the one I'm going to land on. There were 2 guys I was in between, the other being Calvin Ridley, who I've given enough reason for. Check out some of our other episodes for some of that. But Rashee Rice is going to be the one I go with. I think the DUI and the offseason things and off-the-field stuff have been distracting from just how dominant he was as a rookie in 2023. From week 12 on with Patrick Mahomes, he was the wide receiver 4 in all of fantasy football. In the postseason, I know Travis Kelce is Mr. Reliable. Well, then why is Rashee Rice also getting over 8 targets per game in the postseason? Because Patrick Mahomes has faith and trust in him. Right now, ranking-wise and ADP-wise, he is in the range of Xavier Worthy, rookie receiver who is a speed demon, and we always get excited about the new toy that gets to go with Patrick Mahomes, and Hollywood Brown, who always keeps getting hurt and got hurt in this preseason already, which gives even Rashee Rice even more potential than I already thought. Everything's looking great. The only concern is what's going on with his suspension. And it doesn't look like the legal proceedings are happening at the moment. It looks like they're still waiting to happen, and the NFL never issues a suspension or puts a player on the commissioner's exempt list until after everything's handled legally and in court. So he is going to be available, it looks like, week 1. And if Rashee Rice plays the entire season, if we told you there was no concern about that, his ADP is going to be a top 20, top 15 receiver based off his production. Rookie receiver going into sophomore season, Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid. Like, check so many of those boxes you want for a fantasy breakout league winner. But he's going in the 6th and 7th or 8th round, depending on the platform. So things are not aligned here. It is literally just, do you think the offseason stuff is going to affect him this year or next year? And if it affects him this year, his ADP is where it should be. But in the games that he plays, he's going to dominate because he did last year. And all the reports from camp have been that he's been Mahomes' number one target on top of Travis Kelce. So everything is looking like it's going in the right direction for him. And if he does not face any consequences this year, you just drafted who should finish as a top 12, top 24 wide receiver as your fourth wide receiving option if you go zero running back. So everything looks like he's going to be a league winner. And I'm kind of putting my stamp like I did on Mike Evans last year. Mike Evans, I just said, this is way too low in ADP for a guy that looked way too good last year and to me was getting a quarterback upgrade. To me, this is a guy that we're clearly missing on in the fantasy community. And with the suspension, without the suspension, his ADP is great. So I do not care what goes on with that. We would need to hear that he's missing over half the season to not take him at this range.
I'm going to double down on rookies for breakouts, and I'm going to go with Brian Thomas Jr. for a couple reasons here. There's a couple quarterbacks that do throw for close to 4,000 yards a year, and one of them is Trevor Lawrence. In his career, 3 seasons, 3,600 yards, 12 touchdowns. Rookie season, that's okay. 4,100 yards, 25 touchdowns, and then 4,000 yards, 21 touchdowns. So the touchdown numbers aren't great, but the yardage numbers are great. That means that Trevor Lawrence is going to throw for more as his years go on. On top of that, they drafted Brian Thomas Jr., knowing that they wanted to get another weapon for Trevor Lawrence after they just signed Gabe Davis. This is a guy that they do plan on using. Now, last year, they had Calvin Ridley as their wide receiver, too. Calvin Ridley's stats last year were 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns. I think he was a top 25 wide receiver, also had 76 receptions. So if Brian Thomas replicates that, that's going to be a great season, especially at Brian Thomas's value right now. He's being drafted at wide receiver 46, 96th overall. On top of all of this, there's a lot of negativity going around about Christian Kirk, who has been Mr. Reliable for Trevor Lawrence. And I was actually beating the drum last year saying draft Christian Kirk over Calvin Ridley. But there's actually a lot of negativity going around about Christian Kirk. And I could see Brian Thomas having an Amon-Ra St. Brown-like season where maybe for those first 8 weeks, he doesn't get a lot of targets. Maybe he's not involved a lot. Stash him on your bench because Amon-Ra St. Brown became a league winner. And the term breakout doesn't mean that he has to have 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns, but it does mean he has to break out. If he breaks out from weeks 9 to 16, he's going to win you guys a fantasy football championship, and that's the breakout that you'd like to see, especially in a keeper league like me and Nick have.
Yep.
Your bust for wide receiver. Who do you got? I hope we don't have the same one. I think we might.
I'll be honest. I don't know if you had the confidence to put the guy I put in. I said there were 4 guys I was cycling at the top. A lot of people say 5, and number 5 is the guy I'm saying is busting. It's Justin Jefferson. Obviously, you got to believe in the talent that he has, but that is literally the worst situation in all of football at the quarterback position. Without Cousins last year, he averaged 16 points per game, and he's going off the board right now as the wide receiver 3. Talent and targets are going to give him a safe floor, but he's going to have such inconsistent play. And McCarthy, for the very few snaps he played in preseason, he looked pretty good. I don't know if I would have still said Justin Jefferson's a bust or I would take him at 3, but I probably would have him ranked higher than if he had Sam Darnold. And, you might say, oh, Sam Darnold, he's fine. He's good. He deserves a situation. No. When he had DJ Moore averaged 14 points per game at the position. Justin Jefferson is way better than DJ Moore. How much better is he going to be as the dominant wide receiver on the team? Sam Darnold in his career never had a 20 touchdown season, never had a season over 3,050 yards. He barely broke 3,000 once, which is why I had to say that. Since 2018, when Sam Darnold entered the league, there's 30 quarterbacks who started over 40 games in that span. Sam Darnold has the second to worst record, second to worst passing yards per game, second to worst yards per pass, the worst completion percentage, the worst touchdown to interception ratio, and the worst passer rating in all of those quarterbacks. He is literally the worst starting quarterback in the league. Every single number points to it. DJ Moore with Sam Darnold. DJ Moore, who looked phenomenal with Justin Fields, who is now a backup quarterback, had 89 catches on 154 targets in 18 games from Sam Darnold. Only 7 touchdowns, only 1,200 yards in that span. That is absolutely absurd. He's pretty much throwing to his wide receiver 1 under 65% completion. That is terrible. And for a guy that threw 59.7% in his career as a starter, that is terrible. Listen, I don't think Justin Jefferson has a solution to finish in the top 5 with this quarterback situation. For him to hit right now his ADP of wide receiver 3, this is what he would need to beat last year. Amon-Ra St. Brown. Amon-Ra last year, 1,500 yards, 10 touchdowns, 120 catches. If for Sam Darnold's best season, that would be 50% of the yards that he throws, 50% of the touchdowns he throws, and 120 catches. That is not possible in the modern NFL for any single player.
So my bust, I'm keeping it with the rookies. I'm going with Malik Neighbors. And this one stings as somebody that just drafted Malik Neighbors for his dynasty team. But you know what? Dynasty's playing for the future, and I'm playing for the Giants to go get a better quarterback next year. I think Neighbors is very, very talented. I think Daniel Jones is, if you look up talented in the dictionary and then you go to antonyms, I think he fits every antonym possible. I wrote here, Daniel Jones stinks. Never produced a wide receiver with 1,000 yards or double-digit touchdowns. I'll be honest, I'm not sure if I completely fact-checked that, but I did look at all his top receivers, and I'm 99% sure. I'm 99% sure that one's true. On top of that, 6th hardest strength of schedule. And I know the Giants will be playing from behind, but guess what? They played from behind the last, feels like, decade, and they've been bad for the last decade, besides Odell Beckham Jr. And maybe one season of Evan Ingram, who's actually broken out with the Jaguars. I don't have any faith in Malik Neighbors, especially when he's being drafted at the wide receiver 23, 39th overall. When I originally wrote this list, Nick, he was actually being drafted as the wide receiver 16 and being drafted at 27th overall, but I just fact-checked that and had to change it. However, if you want to look at the wide receiver 23 last year, the wide receiver 23 was Jordan Addison in PPR leagues. He scored a total of 221 fantasy points. He did that on 70 receptions, 911 yards, and 10 touchdowns. I think Neighbors could actually get a lot of receptions. I think he could get close to 90. But the yards and especially the touchdowns is what I'm worried about. And again, I hope I'm wrong for the sake of my dynasty team because I would like to compete. But I am very concerned that we are taking Malik Neighbors very, very early where we are expecting a lot out of him. For example, let's look at some of the names right now. Let's just look at the receivers right now that are going around Malik Neighbors at wide receiver 23. Behind him, Amari Cooper, who's been very reliable. Stephon Diggs, I'm not sure I'd want him this year, but he's still Stephon Diggs. Zay Flowers, wide receiver 1. T. Higgins, wide receiver 2 on that Bengals offense. Christian Kirk, who's currently the wide receiver 1, could get left by Brian Thomas, like I just mentioned. Terry McLaurin, wide receiver 1 for rookie Jaden Daniels. George Pickens, who I've actually started to like a lot more. Knicks guy Rashee Rice. Tank Dell. The list can go on and on and on. I don't know why Neighbors is being drafted at wide receiver 23. And the other rookies here, Lade McConkey, who could be the wide receiver 1 over there, is at wide receiver 41. Roma Dunze, wide receiver 42, who I also think could have a breakout season in weeks like 9 to 16. Brian Thomas, wide receiver 47. Keon Coleman, who could be the number 1 for Josh Allen at wide receiver 51. I don't get the obsession with Neighbors. I just don't. I know he looks good when he's actually catching the ball, but look who's throwing him the ball. And it's tough for me to sit there and say that this guy is going to have a successful rookie campaign, knowing the quarterback situation he's in at the moment.
I want to give you a couple more stats because I am all out on Malik Neighbors with this quarterback situation. Since 2019, Daniel Jones, his top receiver in yards per game, is Golden Tate at 46.3. In the totality of the Daniel Jones era since 2019, only one wide receiver has caught more than 10 touchdowns over that 5-year span. It's Darius Slayton. Not a single touchdown with Daniel Jones in a single season has caught over 4 touchdowns in a year. Not a single receiver for Daniel Jones has scored more than 50 catches. Not a single one has scored over 770 yards. Everything points in the wrong direction for Malik Neighbors' situation. The talent's there. The production's not going to be.
Yeah, it's going to be very tough. It's going to be very tough. All right, moving on to running backs. Who is your running back MVP?
I'm keeping it brief. I'm going CMC.
Sure.
I mean, listen, it's the safest pick in the draft. He finished top 2 every year that he's been healthy. By far the most dominant fantasy player we've probably ever seen. I don't want to overthink it. I know we want to get young and sexy with Bijan and Brees, who I do love. Do not get me wrong. But CMC outscored everybody in fantasy by over 100 total points at the running back position last year. And that was the second time in his career. The first time was 150 points. He's playing on the most dominant team ever, offensively, the Avengers. And he's the engine. To me, I don't like taking running back this year. CMC is the only guy that I'm probably taking over the first 7 receivers on the board. So for me, it's Christian McCaffrey, and then it's the rest.
I'm pounding the drum. Brees Hall, baby. Brees Hall is not just going to be the running back MVP. He's going to be your fantasy football MVP, because in a lot of leagues, he's going to slip to picks 5 to 7, something like that. And I think he's going to have a stellar year. Coming off that serious injury last year, he finishes as the running back 2 with everything pointing against him. Jets getting blown out in games. Piss poor quarterback play. No reason for that team to care once Rodgers went down. I hate to bring up old wounds to my co-host Nick, but what was it, first play of the season? There was no reason for that team to care at all. And they did care, especially Brees Hall cared at least, and he fought, and he probably helped win you a fantasy football championship. In his last 8 games, in 5 of them, he had over 18 fantasy points. I believe 2 stellar performances as well in the semifinals and the final. So week 16, 43 fantasy points in a PPR league and 27 points in your championship round. And then he had 29 in week 18 as well. I know we don't really play into week 18, but I should also mention that in week 18, he had another 29 fantasy points. He's getting Aaron Rodgers back, and that should only benefit him. Rodgers is 41, coming off, it's Achilles or AC? It's Achilles. Rodgers doesn't need to throw for 4,000 yards. Rodgers needs to not throw interceptions, which he's the best player ever at just not throwing interceptions. I think he has the highest passer rating or QBR ever, just every stat ever, just not throwing interceptions. Yeah. He has to manage the game. He has to score about 20 points a game for that defense to control the clock, for that defense to control the game. The Jets' winning success week in and week out should be hold the other team under 17 points and give Brees Hall the rock 15 times, 100 yards. Brees Hall is one of only 2 players in the league that I truly believe could go 1,000. Last year, he caught 76 receptions. 76! That's more than a lot of receivers. And that number should only go up this year. So could McCaffrey definitely finish with the running back 1? Yes, but I think Brees Hall is going to be a solid running back 2. And I'm more than happy taking him at picks 5, 6, or 7, wherever he does end up going. In some leagues, he's actually going in the top 3 over those receivers. But I don't hate that either.
Sure.
Who is your breakout running back?
I'm going with the breakout of Josh Jacobs. I'm following the money. He's the youngest running back. He's not the youngest. He's a very young running back still, and he just got paid big bucks to go over to the Packers. And the Packers were an elite offense on the back half of last season. Love in the preseason. It looks like he has not missed a single step. I know there was concern like, oh, we've only seen him for 8 games. Nope. He came out week 1 of the preseason, threw deep touchdowns, was on fire, on target to all of his guys, spreading the ball, spreading the love. No problem. We're looking at Josh Jacobs in this role, taking over for Aaron Jones. And I think people forget just how dominant Josh Jacobs was for the last 2 seasons, because the end of last season ended poorly. 2 years ago in 2022, he was the RB3 in fantasy. And last year, up until he got injured, he was the RB4. And that was with horrible quarterback play for both of those seasons. The Packers did not have a dominant running back last year. I know a lot of people think Aaron Jones was pretty good. No, but the team overall was a very good rushing team. They overall had a little over 2,000 total rushing yards with very inefficient running back play. So Josh Jacobs does not need to be an efficient running back, but if he's getting 60% of 2,000 yards, that's 1,200 rushing yards, which does not include that this team probably has a top 10 offense in football. So all of that is going Josh Jacobs' way. On top of that, Aaron Jones had 43 targets in the 11 games that he did play. If you pace that out, that's a 67 target season. That's not Brees Hall's 70 plus receptions Nick was talking about, but you can get Josh Jacobs in the 3rd or 4th round depending on your platform. So for me, that's a guy that's just fallen a little too far. where I think the range of outcomes is a top 5 running back. He could finish as the RB1 in fantasy. I would not be surprised with this engine and with this team. I do think a few things need to go his way for that to happen, but I do think that a top 3, top 5 season is in the range of outcomes, and he's kind of being drafted a little bit closer to his floor with this ADP than what his potential to break out could be. So Josh Jacobs, if you're in the 3rd round, you go double up on receiver. To me, that is the smash home run, consistent, safe floor, high ceiling running back pick that you want in the 3rd round.
I really struggled with this one, and originally I did have Bengals running back blank, and I am still very high on the Bengals running back room, but my issue with the Bengals running back room is they had Chase Brown last year, and they really did like Chase Brown. Then they bring in Zach Moss, who was very effective with the Colts last year, so I am worried about the committee situation. However, I think there's a lot of points to be taken with that Bengals running back room, and I would draft either one, whichever one you get in your draft. If you get one, get both. In rounds 9 or 10, I think they're going right now. I think they'll be very, very competitive. I'm going to go with Zamir White for the Raiders. And I like no competition. They did not bring in any running back. They did not really draft any running back. I like a guy that has no competition. I like a guy for the last 4 games without Josh Jacobs was averaging more than 13 plus fantasy points. I like a guy who was averaging 114 scrimmage yards on 23 touches a game over those last 4 games without Josh Jacobs. On top of that, I like that they brought back Antonio Pierce. Antonio Pierce knows what he has in Zamir White, familiar coach. The players wanted that coach. If the Raiders are to be any bit successful this year, they're going to want to control the clock as well. Antonio Pierce, defensive mind. Their defensive line is downright nasty, maybe the best in the league. If their defense can control some of those games, they're just going to want to run the ball. Last year, Gardner Minshew produced both Zach Moss and Jonathan Taylor to have successful games. So I think you're taking a running back 1 that's being drafted right now as the running back 24. He's being drafted in rounds 8 or later. And I think he'll get taken a little bit earlier, but I think you're taking a starting running back in rounds 8 to 10. So if you're going 0 running back strategy and your options are like James Conner, Zamir White, thinking of some other guys, DeAndre Swift, I'm really cool with taking Zamir White as my running back 2 if you're doing 0 running back strategy.
I like it.
Your bust. Who's your bust?
I'm going Derrick Henry. I think I've gone a little bit bolder on my my bust takes because I just do not love for what I've seen at the top of the board. You've heard it so far: C.J. Stroud, Justin Jefferson, Derrick Henry. Again, no doubt in what the talent is, and for Derrick Henry, what the talent was. I'm concerned that he's hit the age cliff and some things last season, which I'll get into, that worry me for his fantasy production. But I just can't buy into the Derrick Henry at his ADP right now. He's going off the board in the top 10 as a running back at the back half of the 2nd round. He's going right in the Josh Jacobs range. And if you're in any of my leagues that now I'm going Josh Jacobs over Derrick Henry. But I just can't buy into it. The fact is, age 30 season and no running back in NFL history has outperformed their ADP when they got paid over $5 million on their 3rd NFL contract. Everything points in the wrong direction for him. And for ADP and for projections based on whether you use Fantasy Pros, Sleeper, ESPN, Yahoo, it's built on not saying I think Derrick Henry is going to be better than player X or Z. It's based on this is how many touches I think he's going to get for this many yards, for this many touchdowns. They multiply it out, and that's his projected total points, and that's how the rankings work. Right now, ADP is projecting that Derrick Henry is going to have 270 touches right now, which for me is absolutely ridiculous and way too high when you have Lamar Jackson, who's had over 100 carries last season. Lamar does not check it down, so you're not going to get the check down running back where I do think Josh Jacobs could, where Aaron Jones had was on pace for 67 targets. That's not Derrick Henry's game, and that's not what the Baltimore Ravens do. It's why, even though the Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins, they look so good as running backs, and Gus Edwards had 13 touchdowns last year. Yes, he might be able to get that, but he did not have anywhere near 270 touches. That's just not what the Ravens running back room has been. And I'm not saying that Derrick Henry is a worse running back and can't handle more of a load, but he is not going to handle enough of a load to be a dominant player. On top of that, you have to have some concern because they had 2 offensive guards and an offensive tackle leave in the offseason. And this is just something important to note and something that I think got lost last year, and something that people don't talk about. Tajay Spears and Derrick Henry, when they both played last year, Tajay outsnapped him. So Mike Vrabel, who, yes, I get it, he was fired. We all know he is an NFL level head coach and probably a top 16 coach on the planet for the NFL. He did not choose to say Derrick Henry is not better than Tajay Spears. He said Derrick Henry's hit that age clip and Tajay is better. So I'm just saying, I think that Tennessee knew he couldn't handle the workload. That's why they let him go and why they let Tajay get a little bit more onto the scenes and why they let him walk. So I'm not going to buy into the Derrick Henry hype this year.
I think Devon Achane is the biggest outlier in fantasy football. And I don't think what he did last year is sustainable. Did he help win leagues? Yes. Did he win weeks? Yes. Did he get hurt? Yes. He is 5'8", 188 pounds. It's very small for a running back. Is he the running back one? He's competing with Raheem Mostert, who was also very, very effective last year. They then went and drafted Jalen Wright pretty high. Why are you drafting a running back who fits your scheme very, very well when you already have two of them? This tells me it's going to be another committee situation. You're taking a guy who's going off the board at the running back 10 around a guy like Isaiah Pacheco, who I almost had as breakout, but I guess he's already broken out. He's going ahead guys like Pacheco, Kenneth Walker, Joe Mixon, who are solidified running back ones, and you're taking it for the high ceiling, low floor. The only way that you could comfortably take HN is if you were A, getting Mostert as your handcuff, and B, if you have another running back that you could trust, because I'm not sure he's going to play all 17 games this year. There's just a lot of outliers with his stats last year. He never eclipsed, I think, 12 carries last year. So his carries are hovering under double digits. You're banking off the speed and you're banking off him breaking out a big run every single week, which is not sustainable and not going to happen. So I don't like the ADP, and that's what I'm going off of. Okay. Tight ends. Who's your MVP?
I'm going Mark Andrews. I think he's somebody that's going a little too far down the board. And for me, I think that we're forgetting about it because it's coming off the heels of the Laporta dominant season and the Kincaid sophomore breakout, and Kyle Pitts gets the new quarterback and Kirk Cousins in the stat sheet stuffer, and Travis Kelce just had that great postseason. I think he just kind of gets lost in the mix, and he's not as sexy of a player as a lot of people think. So I think people forget just how dominant he was for the last 3 years in fantasy. Let me give it to you right now. 2021, tight end 1 on the year, 300 plus fantasy points. 2022 was one of Kelce's best seasons ever for fantasy. Where, if you recall, last year his ADP was the 6th player off the board. But Mark Andrews that year was the tight end 4. He missed 2 games. And if you paced out his average points per game and he played the other 2, he would have finished as the tight end 2 on the year. And then in 2023, he missed some more time to injury. He was averaging 16 points per game, which would have been the league high at the tight end position, and then gets replaced with Isaiah Likely, who averaged 15 points per game and was the tight end 3 for your fantasy playoffs. So I'm not saying that it's the greatest pick and everybody loves it and he's the guy everybody wants, but he's been so good for fantasy, and the Ravens know how to get the ball to the tight end position. And he is probably the only one of these guys, obviously Kelce may be a little different, that is the true number 1 target on their team. So I just think Mark Andrews is clearly getting a little disrespected here at the 4th to 5th round ADP.
Keeping it short and sweet, I think it's going to be Laporta again. Same O-line, same running back, same receivers, same quarterback. Their schedule is going to be a little bit tougher, but the Lions are here. The Lions are for real, and they're going to compete and win a lot of football games. And I see no reason why he can't repeat. So I'm taking the easy way out, and that's why he's my MVP. Who is your breakout tight end?
I'm going with Kyle Pitts.
I'm also going with Kyle Pitts.
Nick likes to call my guy Justin Herbert a stat sheet stuffer. Well, I don't think there's a better stat sheet stuffer than Kirk O'Chains. He's averaging 4,200 yards per game and 30 touchdowns in his time in Minnesota. Every year as a starter in Minnesota, his number 1 target went over 1.1 thousand yards and 6 touchdowns. TJ Hawkinson, who is nowhere near the athlete, averaged 15 points per game with Cousins last season. And
Hawkinson was the tight end 1 in 2022 after being traded to the Vikings. So in those last 8 or 9 weeks, he was the tight end 1.
And for tight end, when you want to draft someone early, you need a reliable floor. TJ Hawkinson last year only had 1 game under 11 points. with Kirk Cousins. So 15 points per game last year when he was healthy would have been, you guessed it, if you scored 15 points per game last year, which is what TJ Hawkinson did, that would have been the tight end 1 in fantasy. So I'm very simply saying Kyle Pitts stat sheets plus stat sheet stuffer equals very good breakout productive season. And I might die on the hill of Kyle Pitts like a lot of people did for the past few years, but this is the first time I really want to put my foot down on him.
I will too. I mean, Kirk Cousins has produced Justin Jefferson 1,400 yards in 3 straight seasons. Stephon Diggs had 5 straight 700-yard seasons. Adam Thielen, 5 out of his last 6 seasons, 700-plus yards. On top of all that, Kirk Cousins has thrown for 4,000 yards in 8 of his last 9 seasons. Kyle Pitts is going off the board at 81 as the tight end 7. The Falcons also have the easiest strength of schedule. I would love to get a piece of this offense, whether it's Kyle Pitts, whether it's Drake London. I do like Pitts' ADP better just because he's later in the draft and I can get a stud later in the draft. Pitts' best season was his rookie season, 68 receptions, 1,000 yards, and 1 touchdown. I think Matt Ryan was his quarterback. I don't remember who his quarterback was. But he hasn't gotten the receptions since that season. So if he's going to get close to 70 receptions, he should have been 1,000-yard season and should have more than 1 touchdown, 5+. So he is this year's breakout candidate for tight end. And lastly, who is your bust?
I hate to do it, and I think it's the first time we did the whole episode. My bust is Nick's MVP. I'm going with I'm going with who I'm going to call the Laporta Potty this year.
It's a rough nickname.
That is a rough, very, very rough nickname. I don't think he's going to be terrible for fantasy, but I don't think he's going to deliver on his ADP. For him to finish at the tight end 1 and be worth the ADP at the middle of the second round, he's going to need to out-average Travis Kelce or the tight end 2 on the year by 2.5 to 3 points per game. That's about 40 to 50 points on the season, which is pretty much what Kelce has done to solidify that ADP for the past few seasons. But to me, I just think it's going to be too up and down this year. I think there's a ton of weapons on this team. Gibbs, Monty, Amon-Ra, Donovan Peoples-Jones they bring in, who's a deep threat. Jameson Williams, who's a game breaker. These are guys that are going to get some long balls. They're going to get some touchdowns. They're going to get Gibbs breaking out for an 80-yard touchdown at some point. And for me, Travis Kelce's ADP was worth it because not only was he the tight end 1, but he was the clear number 1 option on his team. He was clearly going to get all those targets. And last year, Laporta in his rookie year had a little bit of an outlier with double-digit touchdowns at the tight end position. Not saying he can't do it again, but to be dominant for fantasy and worth that ADP, there's a lot of things you need to go right. And for him to go in the middle of the second round, you need to pretty much be perfect. And to me, here's the opportunity cost. If you take Sam Laporta in the first round, you either get Sam Laporta and Kenneth Walker, or you get Mark Andrews, who I think will be the tight end 1, with Kyron Williams. Or you get Sam Laporta and George Pickens, or you could get Kyle Pitts and Devontae Adams. So the opportunity cost of taking Sam Laporta right now, I think it's just a little bit too high and a little bit too rich for where I want to be on the tight end position.
This is the one I struggle with the most because I do like the ADP of most tight ends. So I went with George Kittle, and here's for the reasons. He's going right now at the tight end 6 overall ADP 73. I'd rather have Kyle Pitts right behind him. Finishes the tight end 5 last year. Not a bad season, but he did have 8 games last season under 10 points. So that means you're banking on a guy that is probably going to lose you half the games in your season. And there's no reliability. I know he's going to have he's a very high ceiling, low floor guy. But on my dynasty team last year, I had Kyle Pitts and Jake Ferguson. I actually opted to trade. I opted to trade George Kittle, keep Jake Ferguson, and I was playing Ferguson more than I was Pitts just because I felt Ferguson was more reliable, and I'd rather take the chance of putting Ferguson in my tight end slot and getting me 10 points than Kittle dropping 2. Just a crowded offense. He's the 4th option behind McCaffrey, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, and then there's George Kittle. And I know injuries happen, especially with that team. They're the most injured team every single year for whatever reason. But you just can't draft based on injuries. So as it stands, he's the 4th option on that offense, and he'll probably give you like 2 or 3 breakout games. But that's not enough for me to take him over guys like Evan Ingram, who's been very reliable, guys like Kyle Pitts, who I think could be a breakout, guys like Dalton Kincaid, who's going around there, Trey McBride. There's enough talent for me to look for, and I'll pass on Kittle.
Sure.
So With that said, that is our show with MVPs, busts, and breakouts. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Let us know on our social media channels what you think. Tell us who your breakouts are. Tell us who your busts are. If you don't want to share your secrets, tell us why you don't like our picks. Either way, let us know and interact with us on our social media channels, Primetime FF Pod. We're available on all audio streaming platforms, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Anchor. The show is also available on YouTube, Primetime Fantasy Podcast. Make sure you like, subscribe, and follow us anywhere where you can find the show. We'll also have live shows during the NFL season, Sunday mornings, bright and early to get your start sits and help you prepare your lineups. Thank you guys for listening and watching. We'll catch you guys on Monday for another Mock Draft Monday. I think this is going to be our final mock draft, Nick. I think mock draft 5.0 is where we'll cut it off with your drafts coming up. So our final mock draft coming up this Monday, mock draft 5.0 for mock draft Monday. We'll talk to you guys then.